Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to today's stream. Today we're going to be going over some React concepts, learning to code, learning a little bit about React using some hooks, some state management, and fetching data from an API. What we're going to be building today is a small app that uses the GitHub API to get a user, get their profile information, get their latest repos, and link out to their latest repos. We're going to be using Create React App and Chakra UI for our styling. We're not going to go over styling ourselves just because to save some time. So Chakra UI will be a pretty good tool for this to get started. So let's jump into it. So I'm here on the Chakra UI site, and like I mentioned, we're going to use Create React App, and Chakra UI actually has a Create React App starter kit. So when we go to their site, chakraui.com, and click Get Started, there is here, you'll see for Create React App installation instructions, check out this Create React App template guide. So if we click there, blah, 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 what we want is right here, this npx Create React App, my app template Chakra UI. And this is going to give us the Chakra UI components and theme provider and everything out of the box. So we'll just copy that. And if you don't know what Chakra UI is, it's just a component library that helps you to quickly spin up projects. It uses a styled system syntax in its styling, so it takes like a big object of colors and spaces and stuff. It's really good for starting out projects. I do have my issues with it, which I'm sure we'll get into in this video, but to start out a project, it's actually really good. So we're just going to copy this npx Create React App, my app template Chakra UI, and we're going to head over to a terminal. I have one set up here, and we're just going to run that. But what we're going to do is change this in my app to just dot, because I'm already in my directory here for our GitHub search. Changing that is going to do is, instead of installing this in a directory called my app, we're going to just install it in the directory GitHub search that we're already in. So if I run that, this is going to take a few minutes. And while this runs, I'll just quickly go over the GitHub API that we're going to be using. So what we're going to be doing is allowing ourselves we're going to have an input that a user can enter a GitHub username, and it's going to fetch from the GitHub API and get that user's profile. So this is an example of if we were to go to that API for my GitHub account, you'll see we get like our login information, our avatar URL, our GitHub account, a little bio about ourselves. We'll get all that. And then what we can also do is go to that /repos of the same username and get a list of all the repos that user has that are public. So you'll see here that I have 11 public repos. So our goal is going to be to print out those 11 repos in a component, link out to them, get my profile information and display it on the page. So let's see how our Create React app is done. So we're just going to run yarn start, and that should start it on our port 3000. So here we go. It might take a second to load here. There we go. So you'll see that this is similar to the Create React app boilerplate, but instead we get the Chakra UI logo. Instead of Learn React, we get Learn Chakra, and we get this little color mode switcher up here, which is nice. It comes out of the box with Chakra UI. But like most Create React apps, first thing we're going to do is just get rid of everything here. So if I jump over to my VS Code, in our source directory, I'm just going to delete a bunch of stuff, including our color mode switcher component, because we're not going to do color modes for this project here. So let's delete all this. All we'll keep is our index.js and our app.js. So we'll move all these, go into our index, get rid of these web vitals, get rid of all this down here, and we'll just have our color mode script and our app, and we'll head into our app. We'll remove all of this here. We'll just print out a hello world inside of our Chakra provider. ESLint is going to let us know everything that's not needed anymore. Save that, and we're going to get it formatted. And now when we jump over and refresh our page, you'll see we just have a hello world. And now we kind of have a nice place to start. I'm just going to quickly switch this code here so that it's easier to jump back and forth. So first thing we're going to do is actually lay out our app. So what we want is a search bar on the top of the page, and then we want some content down on the bottom below the search bar. So we're going to have kind of like a header and a main content area. So if I jump back into my app, I'm just going to do that right in this app here. And what we're going to use is some Chakra UI components that we get. So what I'm going to use is a box component. And what we can think of box as similar to a div from Chakra UI. It's sort of their wrapper for anything component. And we're just going to say that this is going to be our header / search. And we'll just import that box here. And another box below that's going to be our content. And this content is going to include things like our profile and our repos in it. So now what that'll do is you'll see we get our header search and our content. And if we were to inspect these, we'll make that a lot bigger so that everyone can see. We're going to get a div with the header search and content, and you'll see that our class names are mangled here so that we're not getting any conflict in between any of our components. So what we actually want though is we want to change this div from a div to a header component to keep our HTML a little bit more semantic, and our div here for our content into a main tag so that our landmarks are correct. And what this box component allows you to do is we can say as and pass it in a HTML tag, and that will actually render instead of a div. You'll see it now changes to a header and a main, which is exactly what we want. So next thing we are going to do is we're just going to lay them out. So what we want is our header actually centered and our content sort of in the middle of the page down in this area down here. So to do that, we're going to style our layout here. And what we're going to actually do is wrap this whole thing in another component that we get called flex. And what this flex is basically a Flexbox container from Chakra UI. So if we import that from Chakra UI as well, and we save it, what you're going to see is that our header and our search are now a flex container, so they end up side by side. Not exactly what we want. And this flex just kind of lets you pass props in that are also attributes of Flexbox. So we can say direction is a column, and that's going to change the direction of our Flexbox to a column instead of a row, which is what we want. And now, so this is kind of what we want here, but now we want our content centered down here. So to do that, we're also going to change our content to a flex. And we're just going to say align center, justify center, and this should center the text. Now, because we also wanted 100% height, we're going to set a flex of 1, and we're going to say that this takes up one space in the flex box. And what we're going to do is on our flex container up here, we're going to say min height is equal to 100 viewport height. So that's just going to say 100% of the viewport height is everything that the browser lets us see. So what we should get now is our content centered in the page, our header and search up here. And now because what makes this centered in the page is that because we are saying that it is a flex of 1, we're saying that it takes up all the space that it needs within the flex item. The reason that this header doesn't take up space is because it doesn't actually have a flex on it. So if we were to take this header and apply a flex of 1, what you'll see is it now splits the space between the header and the main to 1 part each. So kind of 50-50. But as soon as we take that flex off, we're basically telling it to only take up the space that is needed. And that's exactly what we want for this project. So next thing we want to do is actually get our little input in here that we're going to use to search for a user. And just quickly, I'm just going to add a background to our main area of white smoke. And that's just going to allow us to differentiate between the content and the header. A little bit of a background color. Hopefully everyone can see that. And now let's get that input in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to import an input and a button from Chakra UI. And we're going to render another flex here, and we're going to render it as a form. And within that flex, we're going to say input with a placeholder of enter a username and a button type of submit. And we're just going to say search. Now we have this huge input up here with our search button here. So let's give that a little bit of styling because this isn't very nice right now. So we're just going to say on this form, we're going to give it a padding Y of 3. Now, this is actually one of the areas where I think that Chakra UI can be really confusing. Is up to this point, it's been pretty simple. We have a flex component that gives us a flexbox container. We have a box component which renders us basically any element we want. And then we can add kind of like any sort of CSS property, aligns, justifies, flexes, backgrounds. What this 3 is kind of a magic number. What we would expect here is actually 3 pixels, but when we go back, you'll see that we get much more than 3 pixels. And if we go 4, you see we're going to get much more than 4 pixels. And if we were to take a look at that, you'll see the padding we actually get is this Chakra space 4. Now, because Chakra UI uses the styled components system, what it takes is an object, and in that object, your whole theme is an object, and within that object you have a space array, which is an array of numbers that allow your spacing to be consistent throughout your project. So I believe by default Chakra UI says that that array is 8 pixels, 16, 24, 32, sort of the magic numbers all the way up. And this can be confusing for somebody who doesn't understand Chakra UI coming into a project. If we were to pass this off to someone or another contributor wanted to come in, it would be pretty confusing to them. And this is one of the areas where I think that Chakra UI is powerful for starting up a project, but could be a little bit confusing once you get going with it. But anyways, we will continue on with adding a little max width here of 768 and a margin X of auto. And what I believe that should do is it gives us a centered content It looks a lot bigger than 768, but that's because I'm quite zoomed in so that everyone can see this in the video. And then we're just going to give it a little bit of a gap. So we're going to say grid gap equals, again, using those magic numbers, we'll say 4 again. And that gives us a little bit of a space. And this is one of the things that actually is a little bit new to Flexbox, which I don't know if a lot of people know about, is that you can actually use the grid gap or gap properties in your CSS to space out items. It was one of kind of the complaints of Flexbox is, how do I equally space out items? Well, now you can use the gap syntax to equally space out items. So what we're saying here is in between each item in our Flex container, use a gap of whatever our Chakra space for. So if we were to add another button here, you'll see that our gap is equal between all of our items. So the next thing we're going to do is just add a color to this button just to make it a little bit nicer of blue. And I think that's kind of what we want. So we can enter a username, Eddie Sims. We can hit search. It's not going to do anything at this point. One thing to note is when we hit search, what you'll notice is up here, it's going to be really small, but we actually ended up with this question mark. And what happened is by default, a form will want to submit to somewhere. So when we hit submit on that form, we're actually it's trying to post somewhere. And to prove this, what we can do is in our console, we can say console log hi. We're going to get that hi. And when we hit submit, our console's emptied. This is not what we want. We don't want this page to refresh. So first thing we're going to do right away is we're going to prevent this form from trying to post somewhere, and allow our app to just sort of stay a single page app. Going to do the fetch in the background so that our page never refreshes. So the way we're going to do that is in this form, we're going to say on submit, and we're going to say handle submit. And that handle submit is going to be a function that we declare, handle submit. And we're going to pass in an event. And the event is going to be the submission of the form. So we're just going to say event dot prevent default. And that way we're just saying don't actually submit the form. Instead, just prevent the default and don't do anything else. And now what you'll see is if we do that same console log, when we submit, it doesn't go away. And that's because we're preventing that default. So now what we want to do is actually store that value that we're putting in here into some state so that once we want to fetch data, we can know what the username is we're trying to fetch. So how we're going to do that is we're going to use state from React. We're going to use our first hook of useState. So from React, we're going to import useState, and we're going to say const username and set username is useState. And what this is going to do is allow us to set this username variable in state, which means that it won't be mutable. So if somewhere in our application we tried to do something like username equals Eddie, we're going to get a big error that says assignment to constant variable, and should say something about trying to assign it to state. So if we want to change this variable, we actually need to use this set username, and that just allows us to make sure that that username is only changed whenever we want it to be. So what we're going to do is in this input form, or in this input field, we're going to say onChange, and onChange is going to take a function, and we're going to pass an event, And we're going to set the username to the event target, which is our input, and then the value of our input. And what this is going to do is every time we type, we're actually going to change the value of that variable. And to prove it, we'll just output our username down here next to our content. So you'll see we have nothing here. We're going to say E, and you'll see that that updates as we type. So that's pretty much exactly what we want. We want that stored in state, and we have it. So next thing we want to do is actually get some profile information once we hit this search. So to do that, we're actually going to create a custom hook that's going to store our user's profile, store our user's repositories, and also is going to allow us to fetch that information from the API. So to do that, let's head back to our code. And under our source directory, we're going to create a new folder and call it hooks. And under hooks, we are going to create a new file that says use GitHub user.js. And this is going to be our custom hook here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to export a function of use GitHub user.js, or sorry, export function of use GitHub user, and it's going to take a username as a parameter, and we are going to just return our user as well as a get user function. And this get user function is going to be where we fetch our API. So where we're going to store our user is in a state variable. So we're going to say import useState from React. And we're going to say const user, which is our state, and set user. And we're just going to set it to nothing for now. We're also going to declare our get user variable. So we're going to say const get user, which is equal to a function that takes the username. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to say const user profile equals await. And because we're awaiting, we need to make this function asynchronous, so async. And we're going to await a fetch to somewhere. Then we're going to take the response from the fetch and get the JSON from it. Then we are going to take that data and set our user to the data. So actually, we don't actually need this const user profile because by the time we're done this fetch, our user is going to be set. So now what we can do is save this. And if you're not familiar with this syntax, what this is an ES6 syntax that basically what we're saying is user is equal to user and get user is equal to get user. In ES6, if your key and your value are the same, you actually don't need to input it twice. You can just say user and get user and it will auto assign that. So let's save that and let's head back to our app and we're just going to import that. So we're going to import get or use GitHub user from hooks / use GitHub user. And right here, we're going to say const user and get user equals use GitHub user. And now this is going to give us our user variable and our get user variable. So if we were to next to our content, change our username to a JSON stringify because our user is going to come back as JSON. So we can't put JSON data into our app. We need to stringify it. And we're just going to say user and then null2 to get some formatting on it. And then what's going to happen here is when we handle submit, when we submit our form, we're actually going to get our user and we're going to get the user of our username. So what's happening here is when we submit this form, we're going to say handle submit. And as we fill out the form, we're setting our username. Once we handle submit, we're going to get our user, which is going to go into our custom hook, fetch that user. Oh, I guess we need to put in where we're going to fetch here. We're going to fetch that user from a URL, return the data, and set the user. So what is that URL? It is this GitHub profile. So if we copy this here and we template string it and just swap out that username for username. So now if I were to go into my app and I say Eddie Sims and I search, what we should get is a whole bunch of information about me. 10 followers. Sweet. Famous. So next thing we want to do is take some of this user information and let's pass it into a profile component and just display some information. So what we're going to display is our username, our real name, which is in here somewhere, our name, our bio, and our avatar. So yeah, we have our login, our name, and our bio. So let's create our profile component. So what we're going to do is next, under our source directory, we're going to create another folder called components. And in there, we're going to say profile.jsx. We're going to import React from React. And we're going to export a function of profile. And for now, let's just return a box from Chakra UI. So import box from Chakra UI React. And in here, we're just going to say, actually, we'll start by passing in the name. So under profile is going to take a prop of name. And we'll just return that. So now when we head back into app, we will import our profile component from components/profile. We are going to, instead of this content, say profile. And we're just going to say our name is user.name. Now we have Eddie Sims. So if I were to refresh this, oh, cannot read property name of undefined. So this makes sense because at this point in our profile, we don't actually have a user.name. So what we can do is we're not actually going to render this profile unless we have a user. So to do that, we're just going to wrap it in a conditional. We're going to say user, and if we have a user, render that profile. So here we have nothing. We're going to say Eddie Sims, search, and we get that name. So now let's take that profile and put a little more information in it. So let's get this avatar URL, and we're going to say image is our user.avatar URL. We'll head back to our profile. We'll take image. We're going to take, what else? And we'll just take our bio and our bio. And what we're going to return is we're actually going to bring in a avatar. And do they have a heading? A heading component from Chakra UI. I've never actually used the heading component, so we're going to see what happens. First thing we're going to return is an avatar. And that avatar, let's go to Chakra's site and look up how to use it. So let's go docs and find the avatar. And it looks like it takes a source and a name. So we will say avatar takes a name of our name. And let's actually just return this for a second, because I think this is going to be this is going to be nicer than we expect. So yeah, what it's going to do is our name, it's going to get each letter and just return each letter. That's kind of nice. And I think it might actually like randomize the color. So now we got the same color, maybe not. So next, let's actually pass it our image source equals image. And we're just going to wrap that in a box so that we make it a block, wrap it in a block element so that we get a line break after it. Then we're going to take a heading of our name, and I believe this should render in H2 by default. And then we'll just take a box and render our bio. And what we're going to get now is a nice little component here of an avatar, our name. Let's set this size to 2XL. And on our box, let's say text align to center. So we have a nice big avatar here with our name, and we will also pass in our bio equals user.bio. And there we go. We have a user. We've fetched the user, gotten some data, returned it back as a profile. So what I want to go over next is actually validating this quickly. What I want to do is if we try to enter a empty username, I want us to give us just an alert that says enter a name. So to do that, we're going to go back to our app, and on our handle submit, we're just going to check if we have a username. So we're going to say if there is no username, set an alert of please enter a username. And what else we want to do is on our input, we want to set is invalid. So to do this, we're actually going to set a valid, this is invalid through state. So we're going to say is valid, and we're going to store this in another state variable, set valid, and by default. So what we can do is we can set a default value here. We're going to say it's true by default. We're going to say that it is valid. And if there's no username, we're going to set valid to false. And what this should do is when we refresh the page, so I'm saying is invalid if it's valid. We want it to be is invalid if it's not valid. So now if I try to search, I'm going to get this error, and we're going to get a nice little invalid state. And I got David. Did it just give me a random user? How interesting. That's not what I expected to happen there. So we have about 13 minutes left in this stream. So last thing I want to do is when I search for a user, I actually just want to get a list of some repos and list them out below our username. So to do that, we're going to head back to our hook here. And when we do this await, we're also going to do another await in here. Um, we're going to fetch another URL here, and we're just going to copy this, send it back, and say const repos, set repos, useState, and we're going to copy this, and we're just going to go slash repos. And this should allow us to set repos data. So this is going to now fetch our username, fetch our repos, return our user, return our repos, and we should get all of our information there. So let's head back to our app, and we're going to get that username. We're going to bring in our repos, and let's look at what this is going to look like. So if we go to the URL we're fetching, we're going to get an array of objects, and in that we can get this full name or name. Yeah, let's just display the name for now. So below our profile, we're going to say if we have repos, we're going to map our repos because we're going to get an array returned. So we're going to say .map, and this is just going to allow us to loop over each of the arrays. And for each repo, we're going to return just a box that says repo.name. And that's all we want for now. So what I'm expecting to happen here is when I do a search for my name, I'm going to get my profile, then I should get 11 repos below. So search, whoa, and I have them here, but we have a little bit of a crazy layout. And I believe that that can be changed. Yes, because we're just setting a flex here, we just need to change the direction of this flex to column. And that, now we have our repos here. So what I'm going to do next is just create a component for each of these repos to display their name and just a small description and a link out. And I think we can do that within the time limit even. So on this box, so what we're going to say is, we're actually going to change this a little bit, is we're going to say if there's repos, let's just delete this, we'll come back to that. We're going to say if there's repos, return a box, and this box is going to say margin top of 6, because we want to get a little bit, what we want to do is we want to have a little bit of a margin below our profile here, just to give it some space. And within there, we're going to say, now say repos.map again for each repo. We're going to return a repo component, and that is just going to, actually, let's just return that for now. And we'll just, under components, create our new repo.jsx component, import React from React, and we will also import our box from Chakra UI React. And we're going to export a function of repo that's just going to return a box that says repo for now. And we will bring that in here, repo, and we get a list of all these repos. Now, if we open our console, what we're going to see here is we're going to see an error that says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. And what this is a warning from React that just says whenever you're doing this, looping over things, you need to add a key to these, to all the return values. And the reason for that is when React renders things, or if it needs to rearrange things, or say you're array changes, React needs to know which of the items it's dealing with. So what we want to do is add a unique key prop to each of these. And I believe what we can do is just add this ID. So we'll say repo.id, and that warning is going to go away if we refresh our page and do a quick search. Yeah, that warning now goes away. We have our repos, and let's actually do a quick thing here. I wonder if, so there is a simple grid component, and, oh, they use tomato. How beautiful. So we're going to use this simple grid component from Chakra UI because we want to display a grid of our repos. So we're going to say, we're basically going to copy exactly this. And we're going to import a simple grid, and we're just going to change this box here to simple grid and say columns equals 3, and I think it was spacing equals, we'll say 6. And I believe that this spacing should take one of those magic numbers that we talked about earlier. And now we get 3 columns of repo, 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 all the way down, which is exactly what we want. So now in this repo, what we're going to do is we're just going to pass all of our props that we have in our repo down. And to do this, there's a couple ways. Is we could do something like ID equals repo.id. But when we have things like this that are, sorry, I need to pull up that again. Things like this that are really long, we don't want to be passing each of these down. If we want all this data in our repo, what we can actually do is we can just go add a spread operator, which is going to say send all of the repo down as props. Now what that'll allow us to do is on this repo, we can just destructure from that, from whatever we're going to get in there. So we can say name, we can say description we'll get, description, we will get this HTML URL. Now one of the unfortunate things about doing this is we do have to follow the object's sort of naming convention, so we have to take an HTML URL instead of just regular URL. So, and let's get in also the forks. Yeah, I think we'll get forks or watchers. Yeah, let's get watchers count. So let's do that. And we'll just quickly style this. We'll say, we'll bring in a heading, a link, and I think that should be good. So let's say heading, and I wonder what this heading takes for props. Is an H2, and I bet we can just say as equals H3, and we're going to put the name in there. We're going to have a box that just renders our description. We're going to have a link, and let's see what this link takes. So just an href and is external, which we're going to want. So is external and href equals HTML URL. Sorry. And we'll just say view repo. And then we're going to add a box with a little eyeball emoji and say watchers count, watchers. So now in our app, just need a quick drink here. Oh, much better. So now we have our title of our repo, a little description, and some watchers. So you'll see I don't have any watchers, but I have this one that has 11. And let's just add a little bit more styling on this. So what we're going to say is padding equals 3. We're going to add a border. And this is going to take a template string that's just going to say 1 pixel solid and a box shadow that is also going to take a string, and we'll say 0, 5 pixels, 0, 0 RGBA, and just set it to black and 30%. Oh, that's an ugly box shadow. Give it a little blur here. And one more, just a border radius of 3. So now we have our profile and a list of our repos. We can link out to view the repo. And if I were to zoom this out a bit, it's not the most beautiful, but it's actually works pretty well. So there we have it. And just a quick review before we go, we're kind of at time. What we have here is we have our app, and in our app we've created a form, and in that form we have an input where we can enter username. On change we set this username, which is some state. When we submit the form, we check that there is a username. If not, we alert to please enter username. Otherwise we get user, which it comes from our custom hook that does a fetch for our profile information as well as our repos, and it returns our user and our repos. And we render our profile into our profile component and our repos into a repo component. And that's pretty much it for today. That was quite a bit to go through, but thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something. And if you liked it, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll be doing more of these live streams. Thanks for watching. Till next time, peace out.